everybody?
Yes, Prof. Everything clear?
Good. Let's begin. What I'll do is stop every now and then. And if people have questions and comments that they've put in, we will talk about them. So I'm going to be talking about developing a contextual curriculum. And Shoale has already given some reasons why this is important. There are lots and lots, an ever-increasing number of medical schools, and they're all different, private and public and for-profit and not-for-profit. We've got new schools and old schools, traditional schools, and what they call innovative schools, which normally means they're doing something like everybody else. We've got faculties of universities and medical universities. We've got offshore schools and branch schools. We have got so many different kinds of medical school. And those medical schools all have different purposes as well. Some are research orientated, some are primary care, community orientated, some are orientated towards secondary care. They're all different. And those differences are even broader. They might be in curriculum models. There are lots of different curriculum models in the way in which they are regulated and controlled. They're different in their assessment systems and their assessment methods, in teaching and learning methods. They're different in the way in which they state the intended outcome, and we'll come back to that. And they feed into different career and training structures. That means that the courses have different structures as well. And sometimes, well, very often, they will have different admission criteria. They take in different sorts of people. And they certainly have different resources. And that includes the entire health service context. And one of the things that's very often ignored is that schools differ in their educational and cultural assumptions. And we certainly cannot say that educational processes and educational assumptions and cultural assumptions about relationships and roles and behavior and the way we tackle problems, they are not the same. They are different in different places. And that means that one size does not fit all, whether it is between countries or within countries. They are all different, and the richness of those differences is very important to preserve. So, those differences happen for a variety of reasons. Medical schools set themselves up with different purposes. They have different vision statements, different missions, different ideas about what they should be doing. There are very different regulatory requirements. I'm involved in regulation. And if you look at the standards set from one country to another, they are very different. Different educational beliefs, different educational influences, different learning and social cultures, different resources. So all of these things have an effect on medical schools and therefore on medical school curricula. But all medical schools must at some point do roughly the same thing. They must, in their curriculum, reflect that purpose, that vision, that mission of the organization. They must meet regulatory standards. They must take into account the local social and healthcare and educational context, because that is what gives them part of their purpose and part of their identity. They must take into account the national context as well. What is their role in the country as a whole in terms of developing doctors? and they will all be continually renewed. They will all change their ideas in one way or another about what they should be doing and how they should be doing it. So some of those decisions are local, and some of those decisions are national. So some of those decisions are ones which medical schools themselves can take, and some of those decisions are ones which are imposed on them. So that is an overview of why each school must think about its own curriculum. I know that in some countries the curriculum is provided, but even then there will be differences in implementation. So, are there any questions or comments about that background? Not yet?
Not yet, Prof.
Okay.
Can I have a question? Can I have a question?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Go ahead, Prof.
Prof. Janet, at this point, some schools are not, running the entire 5 years program within their institutions. They have partner schools where maybe preclinical or clinical components are done in one and another institutions. So
Indeed.
how do you see this adjustment where the entire thing, local needs and the need assessment and all would be different for the two schools? So how do you see curriculum in that perspective?
That is a really important issue. And while I was saying all of that, I was thinking, well, if you're an offshore medical school, say in the Caribbean or in other places where you are trying to produce graduates for export, where you might only run yourself the preclinical part and then send them off to different places for the clinical part, it seems to me that in the end, somebody has ultimate responsibility for the course, for what happens from selection to graduation. Whether that responsibility is shared or whether it is with the original school that sends its students out, it is still that responsibility. And it is still the case that that curriculum has to be coherent. It is still the case that it has to be quality assured. It is still the case that that curriculum has to be designed to deliver the thing that the medical school says it's going to deliver. And if it wants to deliver people for export, then that's its purpose, and it must be honest and dedicated to that purpose. But in the end, it seems to me unacceptable that anybody, any school would send its students out to a context that that school cannot in some way or another control. That seems to be not right at all. And it's a matter of how you manage that. So at this point, you have to think about curriculum management, which is a completely separate issue. But it has to be managed as a curriculum. Otherwise, you can't say that you're actually controlling the whole curriculum. Any other?
Yeah, we have another question. What are the limitations to this context from institutional point of view?
There are no limitations. There are just differences. If you have limitations of resource, then you manage and design your curriculum to deal with those limitations. There is no point in saying that you want to have a curriculum that's very resource intensive if you haven't got resources. There is no point. So the only limitations that one sees are limitations of trying to do something that are not right for the context in which you're in which you find yourself. So curriculum design and curriculum management requires an analysis of your own purpose and your own context. So I don't see limitations. I see management issues. I think
Okay.
we better move on.
Sure.
At this point. There's plenty of opportunity to come back and ask further questions. So let's think about this, since we're talking about contextual curriculum. What is a curriculum? Well, a curriculum is an ideological statement. We might think about it in terms of, outcomes and topics and disciplines and timetables. It's actually an ideological statement. A curriculum expresses values, beliefs, aspirations. It positions your institution in relation to key players, because medical school curricula can never be independent. Medical school curricula are enacted inside communities. Medical school curricula depend upon various professions to implement it: practitioners, academics, researchers, and other professions as well. And there is the healthcare service, which is fundamental to the enactment of a curriculum. And then obviously there are politicians, there are service planners, and medical schools, one way or another, are allowed to be there because politicians and sometimes service planners, and in my case both, say that you can be there. So a curriculum is an ideological statement that takes into account all of these agencies. And again, these agencies will be very different in different places, which means that you have to design your own curriculum, even if the content of that curriculum is specified for you. Now, how you do that, of course, is something that gives you choices. There are lots and lots and lots of curriculum theories. Sometimes when I read medical education journals or attend conferences, you'd think there was only one. You would think that there was Kern and nothing else. It's not true. There are lots and lots of curriculum theories, and some of them focus on process, some of them focus on the organization of the curriculum, some focus on content, some focus on outcomes, assessment, interactions between the teacher, the learner, and the knowledge. Different curriculum theories have different approaches. And really, it's worth looking at them. If in medical education, you only ever read medical education, you have cut out most educational thinking. So you have to read outside. And I just did this yesterday, actually. I just listed a variety of educational theorists that I could think of. My favorite is the fourth one down, Lawrence Stenhouse. He is my education hero. The ones at the bottom in green talk about medical education. But medical education is derivative. Not much comes from medical education. Almost everything is imported from somewhere else. So you need to know where it's imported from. So there are lots and lots of curriculum theories. You need to know them in order to make your decisions. Because if you don't know them, all you're going to do is copy someone else. And then you've imported their ideas. And then it might not be right for your context. So as well as curriculum theories for you to look at and think about and wonder what is important for you, there are also different things, as you will know, and these things are written about in the medical education literature. There is the declared curriculum, the one on paper, the one that you write, and that's just the beginning. It's probably a minor part of the whole thing. The expectation, the statement about what this curriculum will be. But then that curriculum has to be taught. And the reality of what is actually delivered might or might not be the same as the declared curriculum. That is an issue of curriculum management and curriculum implementation. Curriculum management is hardly ever discussed in medical education. It is fundamental. And then you've got the learned curriculum. So the curriculum can be taught in whatever way it's taught, but what is learned isn't necessarily the same as what is taught. And that's for a whole variety of reasons, some of which is this thing that you all know about, the hidden curriculum. And the hidden curriculum isn't hidden at all. It's a ridiculous term. It is the messages that people give about the curriculum. It's what people do rather than what they say. So there are all these different aspects, which means that not only do you have to design your curriculum in a way that's appropriate for you, you then have to manage it in a way that's right for you and manage its implementation. And you also have to monitor and evaluate it to make sure that the declared, the taught, the learned, and the hidden curriculum are all understood. And it might be sometimes that the taught or the learned or the implied, the hidden curriculum is better than your declared one. You don't know unless you look. So whatever is written on paper will be altered unpredictably in practice. And that will be dependent on where you are and how things are where you are. So medical education tends to think of a curriculum as a statement. We've got a new curriculum and it's written down, as though that was the most important thing. A statement that guides teaching and assessment. Fashions change about how that statement is written, and they are fundamentally fashions. Changes are almost never, if ever, evidence-based. They are fashions, because education is a social science. Ideas in it are socially constructed. They don't change with evidence. It's not a natural science. So curriculum fashions are based on ideas and assumptions and values and beliefs and frameworks that come from the society as a whole. And I am a developmental psychologist. And if you look at developmental psychology and ideas about how we bring children up, they are almost always reflected in what we think about curriculum. So read some developmental psychology. So these ideas are socially constructed. They're not evidence-based, which means that you can accept them or not. But what you must do is try to identify and understand them, because they are not evidence-based. So when you have done all that, you've chosen your curriculum, you've decided that you want a traditional curriculum or whatever you want, what is going to be in that curriculum? Well, a statement of intended outcomes and the content of the educational program. You must have that so you can plan the assessment system. The syllabus content, what will actually be taught, the knowledge, the skills, the expertise to be achieved. The expected methods of learning, of teaching, the experiences, the feedback, the supervision, and then some course structure that includes the entry requirements, the flexibilities that you've got within your structure, the length of the thing, the organization of the thing, and the assessment system. So all of that must be in your curriculum. That is your curriculum. The features, those decisions that you make about that curriculum that you are choosing is a matter of opinion. As I said, there is almost no evidence base for curriculum change. There never was, there probably never will be. So it's a matter of opinion. And so we get lots and lots and lots of different ideas about a curriculum. And it carries on and on. These are ones that just came off the top of my head. And on and on and on. And you might choose one, you might choose the other. The choice is yours, because is there any evidence that one curriculum type is better in any way, or even different in outcomes actually, than any other? No, there isn't. There simply isn't. So this is a choice. You have choices about what you do. So the effect of the curriculum really depends on things other than those choices that you make, because no curriculum type has ever been shown to have better predictive power than any other. No curriculum type has ever been shown to have a greater lasting effect than any other. So we can safely leave the choice of specific curriculum type to local decision. And that's great, because every context is different from every other context. So as far as curriculum goes, the more they differ, the better, because they will respond to their local context, and the choice for students, and indeed places for teachers to work or researchers to work, will be wider. And that's better for students, better for teachers, and better for researchers. To have a wide choice of curriculum type is wonderful. So, any questions?
Yes, Prof. We got few. Can pandemic situations change curricula?
I don't think, well, I don't know. I can't tell anybody what to do. I would say that what has happened is that people have taken short-term responses to how they can deliver the same curriculum. And generally they've said, let's put it online, which might or might not be the right thing to do. So that kind of situation would change some of the ways in which you do things, the delivery mechanisms and so on. But the fundamentals of why that curriculum is there, of how you quality assure it, of how you support students, of how you support teachers, of how you ensure progress and so on, must be the same. Obviously, there are challenges in how you conduct assessments, in how you deal with clinical work, and so on. But my own opinion actually is that crises such as the ones that we're seeing, and the reason why I'm sitting in the countryside in England talking to you all over the world, shouldn't really make that much difference to the fundamental properties of the curriculum. It would just make a difference to the way things are done. That's my view. Your view might be different, and that's fine.
Yeah. Could we take one more question? Say, like, if you could briefly explain the steps in developing a curriculum.
I'm going to do that.
Okay, great.
I will do that. I hope. And when I do that, if I haven't done it well enough, you'll have to come back to me and ask again. So let's move on. This is a summary, really, of why a curriculum is important. It's important because it is a practical instrument. It must be a practical instrument. Of course, it tells you what the ideology of your school is, but it also tells you how it must be managed, how it must be administered, and it's something which informs students and managers and regulators about what should happen. So you can measure what you do against your curriculum, and you can plan what you do against your curriculum. So it is a really important management and information tool. It must reflect the values, the mission of the institution. If it doesn't do that, then there's something wrong. It must describe the output of the institution for the healthcare service, or indeed for somebody else's healthcare service, if you happen to be an offshore medical school in the Caribbean or something. It should describe the outcomes for each individual student. And there is actually no evidence that students ever look at the curriculum, actually, or indeed that most people in the school ever look at the curriculum. It should set standards for the course and for the institution against which it can be evaluated. So it's a quality assurance instrument as well. It should be some kind of a roadmap for teachers. I need to do this and this and this and this. I've got these decisions here and here. So it has to be that kind of information. It should be the basis of management and of resource allocation. Curriculum management is really a huge issue which people, as I've said before, don't think about properly. You can have anything you like on paper, but if you haven't got skilled curriculum management, what's on paper won't matter. It really won't. And it doesn't matter how much faculty development or any of this other stuff you do. If you haven't got proper curriculum management, it will fall by the wayside. It ought to be a landscape for students, although, as I say, students don't very often read the curriculum. Ask your students. It must be the basis of the assessment system. That has to be the case. That is essential. So it's a really important instrument, this piece of paper. Because of all of that, you really need to think about it very, very carefully. It has very particular functions. It tells learners what to expect. It advises teachers what to do, although I would never, ever tell a teacher what to do. They are the expert. And my hero, Lawrence Stenhouse, do read Lawrence Stenhouse. Lawrence Stenhouse puts teachers at the center of every curriculum and of every institution. He sees everybody as being in the service of teachers because they know, and I agree with him. I really agree with him. So it advises teachers what to do. It helps institutions and regulators to evaluate institutional performance. It must be the basis of the assessment system. Otherwise, what are you teaching for? It is said to tell society how an institution is executing its responsibilities. I am not sure about that. I'm really not sure that, quite frankly, society is very interested. And I don't know how it does that, except that people can look at the curriculum and see what you're doing. And sometimes people do. But it should be an open document for anybody who wishes to see what you are doing. So, for all these differences then, there are those similarities in the main functions, and they all try to achieve the same central thing, which is a well-educated graduate who is capable of moving safely onto the next stage of training and practice. People sometimes look at a medical school curriculum and ask whether patient safety in 10 years' time will be affected by it. The answer is no, it won't. Medical school curricula can really only influence things for the next stage. If you prepare people to move on to the next stage safely, you have done your job. You cannot expect to have an influence for much longer than that, because then postgraduate training, the healthcare service, all sorts of things take over. So you must be able to say, yes, they are capable of moving on to the next stage, whatever that happens to be. And because of all the differences we've talked about, exactly what this means will be different from context to context. A well-educated medical graduate has different definitions in different places. What they're moving on to and what capabilities they must have differ from different places. They're moving on to, as ours do, a foundation training for postgraduate studies later. then what is required is something different, because a medical school can have confidence in the supervision and training that the students will get next. So it all depends. If they're going into practice, if when you tip them out of medical school, some of them are going to become general practitioners, you've got a different responsibility. So this means difference in different places, if they're going into practice or if they're going into training and practice. So all these things are different, and your curriculum decisions must be framed by these contextual factors. You have to take them into account. What are you preparing your graduate to do next? And if you do that well, you have done your job. Do not expect to have a longer term effect. There are some ideas which, in my opinion, should not help you to choose your curriculum design. While you're trying to produce your graduate within your resources and your context and your values and your culture, there are some things that should not help you to choose your design. Rhetoric. Medical education is flooded with rhetoric, with terms that mean nothing, with ideas that are said to be theories and have no evidence base, with things that are okay to say at the moment. And these things, adult learning, learner-centered, active learning, learning styles, they all mean nothing. So rhetoric should not inform your decision about curriculum. Fashion should not inform. If you think that people on the other side of the world are writing their curriculum in one way, they might be, they might not be, but it doesn't mean that you should. So fashion should never make you change your curriculum. Unexamined frameworks from other contexts. If you think that my medical school has a nice curriculum, my medical school probably does have a nice curriculum. It doesn't mean to say it would be nice for you. So you have to examine it. And then common myths, which is part of the rhetoric, really. You know, myths, learning by rote is bad learning. It's not. It's actually, in a profession, essential learning. So you really have to be very careful about these ideas, and these should not inform your decisions in any way. They will lead you to an inappropriate and unstable curriculum. So ideas that should help you in your curriculum design: local factors, all the things we've talked about. Your professional judgment about what makes a good doctor, where you are, how those people learn to be good doctors. Try to think independently. Think as a professional. If you still talk like a doctor when you're talking about curriculum, you have succeeded. If you talk like some educational type, you have not. So your professional judgment. Socially constructed values. What are the values where you are? Not what are the values where someone else is. CanMeds or something. It's great for Canada. Is it right for you? Who knows? So socially constructed values should help you, your socially constructed values. And valid learning theories for your context. And not all ideas about education apply to all cultures. There is a whole area of cross-cultural psychology which actually says that some ideas that are drifted around in medical education aren't right for all cultures. So these things should help you to design your curriculum. What do you think about that? No questions? I've just said things that are so dramatic. And nobody's got any questions?
Can I have?
Yes, Prof. Shahid.
Yeah. Shahid here. Janet, thank you very much. Such an informative talk you have been giving. I'm really enjoying it. But my one thing that you have talked about, the community need assessment that the curriculum, when it's set, has always been looking into. But currently, if you look at when we say community need assessment, we refer to the community partnership, the community beneficiary, if the curriculum or the institution created but these things doesn't really happen. As you said, you have answered me already by saying that it is a curriculum is a rhetoric ideas, not evidences. So where the community currently gets benefited from all this curriculum, which is run in a community, where the community need assessment is the basis of a curriculum, but where is that? Many curriculum are on paper. Many curriculum are doing partly, and then they are exporting their students to other schools. So how do you see that community need assessment? How is it really the community gets a stakeholder into curriculum?
Yeah, I didn't use the term community needs assessment at all. That's your term. Yeah. But I would say that what you have to do is to look at
in need analysis. You said in need analysis.
I didn't say that either. It's not a term I ever use.
Okay.
Because I don't believe that needs assessment ever works. That's another issue. But I would say that what you have to do is to look at practice. If you're going to plan your curriculum, you start from practice. And you plan your curriculum to feed back into practice. So you have to talk with practitioners, you have to look at epidemiology, you have to look at the local conditions, social conditions, and so on. You have to do that. Now, it might be that you know that you are going to be sending your students to other places, in which case you can decide what practice, what conditions you're going to look at. But practice, theory, practice, not theory, practice, theory. It's practice, theory, practice. But I should be coming back to this. Let me continue and I'll come back to this. Because you're trying to produce somebody who can go into practice, but it's the next stage that I'm interested in you producing them for. So what will they be doing in the next stage? And are you teaching them things that are not applicable or that are actually irrelevant? But I'll come back to that. Let me just continue. I said that you shouldn't bother with rhetoric. You shouldn't bother with ideas that have no evidence base, that are just words that people use. But there are some things that learning theory, proper education, proper cognitive learning theory tells us. And to design a curriculum, you must properly understand learning, because if you don't, then you're going to be run by rhetoric and you'll start talking nonsense. So you need to know that in educational psychology, in cognitive psychology, all you need to know about is memory. All you need to know as an educational psychologist, for me, it's all about memory. All you need to know is that you've got to establish robust, organized, structured knowledge in long-term memory, which then they can take new memories, new information into, assimilate it, and then by using it in practice, those memories get accommodated, change, suitable for practice. But the first thing is to establish well-structured knowledge. And people will then use that to make it accessible for problem solving. And this is important because you need to know about memory, because I look at some curricula and I think, oh no, this curriculum simply floods short-term memory and it will never enable people to move organized knowledge into long-term memory. Short-term memory is very limited. If you make students run around finding answers to things, that's their short-term memory used up. It won't have time to get things organized and transferred into long-term memory. So never be afraid to teach. Never be afraid to give knowledge. Never be afraid to give organized knowledge. It's the basis of learning. So how does that suggest that we should actually organize teaching and learning? What we know is that we need knowledge in long-term memory to free up the short-term working memory for problem solving. We know that we being educational psychologists like me, that direct instruction of foundational knowledge is really essential. It's the most efficient thing you can do. We also know that all learning is active, even in a lecture. Just because you can see people doing things doesn't make active learning. You can watch somebody reading a book. What's going on in here is very active. Technology actually changes nothing about learning or problem solving. It's just faster access to knowledge, and that's important for what's going on now. learning linked only to problems isn't going to be generalizable. You've got to have an initial structure of the knowledge itself, because knowledge enables thinking. So these are the principles of cognitive psychology that you need to know in order to think about your curriculum. So it tells us to do this. Ensure that each component is taught in a structured way, basic sciences, clinical skills, and offer contextualization, clinical cases, early clinical exposure, so that you do not destroy the inherent structure of knowledge, and give opportunities to apply the knowledge that they're using. And that will give you well-organized memory stores for effective practice. So it suggests for a curriculum structure this: teach them the basic and clinical sciences. And then there's clinical learning to which that knowledge will be applied. And I hope that you bring those clinical examples down to the basic and clinical sciences. But I hope also that you take your basic scientists into the wards to talk, so that you've got a two-way communication between the two, and you've got contextualization of learning. You've got a scientific contextualization of clinical learning. You've got a clinical contextualization of basic science. And that's your learning trajectory. And that is what educational psychology suggests. Integrated knowledge and skill occurs in practice based on robust structured learning. You cannot teach integrated knowledge. You have to teach the knowledge. Any questions quickly?
Dear Janet, there is some question. One of the participants is asking about classroom diversity. How could we deal with the classroom diversity when we want to design a curriculum?
What sort of diversity are you talking about?
The participant asked about differences in students who come from different areas and who are not coming with the same educational background.
Oh, right. Okay. Well, I can't give you the answer to that. What I can say is that if I was faced with that problem, that you have students with different backgrounds, different knowledge levels, all sorts of differences, the first thing you must do is to analyze those differences. And then you've got your curriculum, and what you do with those students to support them will depend on what those differences and those diversities actually are. I mean, in programs here that have had widening participation, a lot of extra support is put into the curriculum for those students who've had a poorer educational background, until they are roughly the same as everybody else. But there are lots of differences. I've just had a student on our master's course who is probably known to some of you actually, who's done a very interesting dissertation on students with language problems who come from one language background and studying in another, as a lot of people do, because curricula are often taught in English. So you have to look at that problem, and you have to plan what you're going to do to address that problem and how you're going to do it, and think of the implications of that, because it isn't always nice for people to be taken out and have to have themselves dealt with for their different qualities. But the response to that will be a local one. But all I can say is you have to analyze it, you have to manage it, and you have to be sure that you understand what the implications of that are for the experience of the class as a whole.
Thank you very much. Another question is there any uniform curriculum in the UK? And if not, why? So why? Why it's not the same?
Why would you have a uniform curriculum? What we've got, that's beyond my comprehension. What we have is the guidelines from the General Medical Council, and the General Medical Council set out, this is what you must teach: basic science, you must do this, that and the other. There must be qualities that, you know, the graduates must have. So it's got a very nice general statement, and the postgraduate one is the same. It's got a very nice general statement. And then within that, every medical school has its own curriculum, and it does it in its own way. They are all different from one another. And that means that people who are applying to medical school can go to a very traditional, academic, research-orientated one, or they could go to a community-orientated one, or they could go to a bigger one or a smaller one, or they can go to all different sorts. So no, absolutely not. I mean, the idea of a uniform curriculum is absolutely opposed to everything that we know about the influence of context. So no, we don't. And neither do they in America.
And the final question, is there any general model for curriculum design? And what are the alternative elements?
Sorry, I couldn't quite hear that.
Is there any general model for curriculum design?
Oh, I'm coming on to that. Let me come on to that.
Sure.
Yes, there is, and yes, there is, and the references at the end will send them. I'm coming on to that, so let me go on. So let's continue. So that's what learning theory tells us, and that's the sort of curriculum design that learning theory tells us we should have. Teach them structure, teach them robust knowledge, let them use it, contextualize it. That'll be wonderful. Then how do we build our own contextually relevant curriculum, which is what you're all asking. So here's some important factors. Health and education problems are local and diverse. So first of all, which is what one of you was just asking, look into that. There are differences in the stage and the nature of the healthcare service and the stages at which people join that healthcare service. There is no educational panacea. There are cultural differences, resource differences, and educational effectiveness is therefore contextual. So you start off by looking at all of these things. So transposing curricular and educational ideas from one context to another is not on. Do not start by looking at someone else's curriculum. Start. The lesson is this, as I've said before, start from the practice of medicine where you are, design your curriculum on that to return your graduates to practice. So a contextual curriculum must do this. It must take into account the local healthcare needs. What are they? The resources that you have. How many people and this and that and buildings and spaces and clinical attachments have we got? You must take into account your local culture, your local conditions, and the aspirations of your students, your teachers, the school, society. So curriculum planning begins by looking at the timetable. It begins with these questions. Because the healthcare service and medical education are interdependent. The context of learning and practice is certainly the most powerful influence on development and performance. So you have to look at that. The context is the healthcare service. Look at it before you think about your curriculum. We begin from the practice of medicine, not from curriculum theory. So that's the first thing. Look at this symbiosis. Where does your medical school fit in here? So you do analysis. First of all, every plan starts with an analysis. And then on the basis of your analysis, you will have the skills, the knowledge, and the values that you want people to develop. So now you're starting to look towards what outcomes you are after. You might want contextualized research, you might want contextualized teaching. So look at where is research going to happen? Where is teaching going to happen? Your curriculum will integrate theory and practice if you do this. You do not have to do anything other than set your curriculum inside the healthcare context and your local social context. So learning will be contextual. How are your students going to see these things? This will include, obviously, the laboratories, the anatomy, everything else. And this will give them their professional identity within their community of practice. How are you going to do that? How are you going to enable these students to develop their identity as a doctor? And you don't need to think about social accountability. Please do not do that. It will be automatic if you develop your curriculum in this way, by thinking about your context. Social responsibility, social accountability is automatic. I think most medical schools are socially accountable anyway. And that will give you your contextual curriculum. So designing your curriculum isn't about a theory. It's about starting from practice. What are you trying to do? Where are you going to do it? What skills, knowledge, development is needed in order to do that? And that includes all the basic sciences, the clinical sciences, the experience, the understanding of the community, the communication skills, everything. So there are so many contextual features that will influence your curriculum: the healthcare system, the practice of medicine, social conditions, political imperatives. What's the disease profile? Economic conditions. Is what you're teaching about communication, about diagnosis, about medication, about prescription, is that fitting in? Culture of health and illness, health professions cultures as well. What culture in the healthcare profession are you enabling your students to enter? The learning culture, human and physical resources. You have to think about all of these things. And then in the end, your decisions about how you do that, you can then decide how you wish to do it. And it doesn't matter. You can then decide how you wish to define outcomes. And you can do that in any way, as long as that can be used for the assessment system. It actually doesn't matter. And if you go, sometimes these days people will go for a competence-based curriculum. That might be about how you write stuff. That's fine. But if you follow through that whole theory, it's also about when people reach a competence, tick it off and they can move on, or they can stay for as long as it takes to reach that competence. That is not practical. It's not possible. It doesn't happen anyway. So you have to think about all these things. And within this, when you've got all these things that you need them to learn, your decision will be, how are we going to do that? And you don't have to have one identity, a task-based curriculum or something. You can do lots of different things. Each type of outcome might require a different type of learning, and that will be wonderful, because the richer your learning environment, the better it will be, and you've got a chance of suiting everybody. So I can't say to you, make your curriculum theory the dominant thing. It isn't. You've got to know about it. Or make your teaching and learning method the thing that identifies you. It mustn't. What identifies you is this. And all the other decisions are choices from everything that you know. Designing a contextual curriculum is about practice, then your curriculum, then practice. So to do that, you will then have a linkage between the medical school and the healthcare system. You will have prioritized health problems. You will have contextual knowledge appropriate to the local setting, and you will have the contextual practice of medicine that your students are going to get involved in. And that will be the knowledge, skills, and experience necessary for the contextual practice of medicine. And you can express that as outcomes in any way you want. I don't mind, it makes no difference. Make sure that however you express it has an assessment system that can be built on those outcomes. You'll have learning in context. I don't mind how it is, be as creative as you like, give it over to your teachers. They're the ones who know how to do this. And you'll have shared planning, service development, teaching, practice, research. So in order to develop a contextual curriculum, you have to have knowledge of your context, of the options for curriculum design, the options for teaching and learning, and then plan it. And while you're doing that, make sure you can manage it into place. So the role of the medical school is important. Consistent and lasting effects of different curricula haven't been proved, so you have freedom to design your own. So medical schools should align the curriculum with the healthcare context, obviously, should work with the service to achieve that alignment, obviously, and must design itself around available resources and local educational culture. So that's it. And the result of that will be your contextual curriculum, a unique curriculum that responds to local resources and learning culture, a curriculum that prepares graduates for training or practice in that community, whatever the community is, a curriculum that develops the profession for the context, a medical school that supports development of the service is what you will have then. And that will be an excellent experience for students, a wider community of practice for teachers, and better services for all communities. So I'm saying start from a different place. Curriculum isn't about theory. Curriculum is about practice and options. If you want references, the one at the top has all the steps in it. So get hold of that. If you can't get hold of it, then ask me. And the second one describes all of the background to a contextual curriculum. That's it. I have nothing else.
Thank you very much. It was a wonderful speech, Janet. And one more question from our audience. Is contextual curriculum should be looked at from macro level or micro level?
What does that mean? I don't know what that means.
What's that?
There is a noise. There is a noise.
Should contextual curriculum be looked at macro level or at micro level? Teachers?
Yeah, I heard the question, but I don't understand it.
Oh, I see.
You have to. Okay, I'll try to answer it, even though I don't really understand what the questioner is asking. But a contextual curriculum, in the end, has to have a curriculum plan. It has to have a timetable. It has to have the allocation of the simulation suites or the lecture theatres or the small group rooms or the community attachment or students going out to the laboratories or the wards. You have to have, in the end, a timetable. You have to have outcomes. You have to have an assessment system. You have to do all of that, but it will be based on the things that you need to deliver the doctor, the graduate, for the next stage of practice where they're going to practice. So it has to be both macro and micro. Curriculum design and curriculum planning is the most tedious effort, but you have to start with your analysis, with these points that I'm making, and then choose from the wide variety of options that you've got for teaching and learning and curriculum design, and make sure that you take into account that students need robust memory structures. Don't throw them into some kind of learning by problem solving. It terrifies me when I hear people talking about students having to be self-directed learners. That is frightening. So it's like saying to me, Janet, you want to be a surgeon? Go and be a self-directed learner. No. So you have to have all of those things and take all of those things into account, and you will reach the design that's right for you. It's macro and it's micro.
Yeah, there's another question. What are the hidden aspects of contextual curriculum?
Hidden? In a sense, I don't know. I hope nothing, actually. I really hope that in your analysis, you know, curricula are not normally designed on an analysis of actual practice. I would hope that in your analysis of practice, nothing is hidden anymore. I would hope that when you analyze the practice context into which people are going, nothing is hidden. I hope that when you talk with your teachers about how they like to teach their subject and how would they like to be supported to teach their subject in different ways, that nothing will be hidden. You know, a hidden curriculum is something, it isn't hidden, it's obvious, it's a horrible term, but that hidden curriculum is something that happens when the reality is not written in the curriculum. So if you have, you know, communication skills and the reality is that doctors are so pushed, they haven't got time for all of this, you have to face that reality. You have to face that reality. So if you, in your preliminary analysis, align reality with your plans, there won't be much that is hidden.
Yeah, there's another question. What is the difference between formal and informal curriculum?
Oh, that sounds like a difference that somebody else somewhere else has mentioned. I have no idea what they might mean by that. If somebody else talked about a formal and informal curriculum, I suggest you go to them and ask what on earth they mean. I assume they're talking about what's written down and everything else that's added to it. I have no idea.
Yeah.
Medical education is full of these bizarre terms, and there's no point in asking me what's inside someone else's head when they invent these terms. I assume it means the curriculum that's on the timetable and then all the other things. Maybe students going around the wards together is the informal curriculum. Maybe the teachers and the students talking in the coffee bar is an informal curriculum. I have no idea. You need to ask the people who use these terms what they mean by them. But it's an important question, because the informal curriculum is something that any curriculum manager needs to know about. If there are things that, and sometimes it's really good, the support that teachers offer students, the support that students offer students, in my experience, is absolutely amazing. Students teaching other students to take OSCEs, for example, absolutely amazing. So you need to know about that, because very often the informal bit is about support and extra learning. That's wonderful, absolutely wonderful. And in the end, you can't control everything that everybody does. I mean, these are grown-up people.
Yeah. What's your say about integrated system-based units in basic science?
I'm not a great one for integration myself. I'm for contextualization. The reason why I'm not very supportive of integration, particularly when it gets to be extreme, is because what educational psychology knows is that there's a trajectory of learning, and you have to start from robust knowledge that is well organized, and then enable people to use it and use it so that gradually it changes inside their head to become usable. So if people say, oh, I can't remember what I learned in, basic science, physiology or something, it's not that they didn't have to learn it. It's that it has changed and changed, so it's now more usable. Now, that's an individual process. The problem with extreme forms of integration is that it breaks down structure that is usable. So systems-based, fine, a lot of people do that. But as long as within that there is systematically organized knowledge that people at the beginning can lay down inside their head, I'm happy. I can remember interviewing some students when we were doing a study for the General Medical Council. And I interviewed students at the end of their final year. And what we found was, and it's all research-based, that the more integrated a curriculum, in the end, the more confused a graduate was. And the less the postgraduate tutors could rely on what their new postgraduates knew. And we found a lot of cases of that. And I remember one student saying to me in her final year, I wish somebody would tell me what physiology is. I wish somebody would tell me what microbiology is. That's not good. So it depends. Systems-based, fine. Systems is a good organizer. But I would say within that, make sure that the identity of the sciences maintain that identity.
Yeah. There's a very simple question called, how often do a curriculum need to be revised?
I don't know. I think that what everybody has to, there is no kind of one revision. What you need to have inside your school is a system of quality assurance, is a system of monitoring. If I were running, we don't have medical education units in the United Kingdom, we don't have them. But if I had people like that, I would locate people inside every department to sit and talk with teachers and students and find out what's happening. Curriculum revision is something which tends to happen on a grand scale, maybe every 5 years or so, or 10 years, but there are always adjustments. And I myself feel that adjustments is what you need, and a proper quality assurance policy will give you adjustments in your curriculum. And I would prefer to see adjustments than wholesale curriculum change. And the reason for that is that there is no guarantee that the curriculum you're putting in is going to be any better than the one that you've got. So I would say that you should change your curriculum when you see that there is a problem or a deficiency with it, or when something new comes in that you must teach people. And sometimes there are new things that come in that you must teach people. So for me, curriculum change has to happen because there is a reason to change it. But you have to develop, every school as part of curriculum management has to have a quality assurance policy. And that quality assurance policy will be the thing that tells you what needs changing when. But you can't say otherwise.
Yeah, and in your curriculum design, where do you think the student stands?
Do you mean, or whoever's asking?
Like in decision making, like should we involve them, or how far we?
Yeah, I mean, obviously you should involve students, but that's quite difficult because if there are any students listening, you're not going to like this. Students don't necessarily know best. But I think that in your quality assurance and in your planning as well, certainly ask them, certainly do that. But enable them also to be honest in their answer. And if they say to you, I want to be taught, and I've seen this happen myself, they say, teach me. And the teachers go, oh, no, we run some kind of adult learning thing here. You have to learn. I just facilitate your learning. That's absolute nonsense. If they say teach them, teach them. And very often students ask for things that teachers think, oh, I don't want to do that. But yes, of course you have to involve them. Of course you do. But I don't think, and you have to ask how they feel about this. You have to, well, not feel, you have to ask how they're dealing with this. You have to look at the outcomes. You have to, in your quality assurance policy, find out how this is working. And very often you will find that the curriculum itself isn't a problem, but its management is. So yes, you have to involve students, but then there is a big issue about how you do that. And sometimes you just have a student representative who might or might not be representative of students in general. So yeah, of course, they are the people that you are hoping to make very happy and to make effective learners. You have to ask them how to do that. So yes, but I would say that you're asking advice. You're trying to find out what their experience is. But as far as decision making goes, I probably wouldn't enable them to make a decision any more than I would enable a 6-year-old to make a decision. Not that I'm equating a medical student with a 6-year-old.
Okay, so there's a few questions asked in the same way. They ask local context, right? But how far we should go in addressing local context, and then we will be producing doctors only workable in local. We can't even export them into different countries. What do you say?
Well, question number one, why on earth do you want to export them into different countries? If other countries want them, that's for that country to deal with, not you. But what that's a whole other discussion. But I've often thought, actually, that if countries wish to export their medical graduates, and it's always poor countries, not rich countries that do that. If you want to do that, why not set up export medical schools? Why have medical schools that are associated in a community that take advantage of the local healthcare system and so on, and then those people leave? Why not have export medical schools? That would be wonderful. But if you think about it, there are some things that everybody has to have, no matter how contextualized. Everybody has to know basic science. Everybody has to have clinical skills. Everybody has to have had the experience of dealing with patients and all that stuff. no matter how contextualized your curriculum is, they all have a lot in common. The knowledge base, because a body works much the same regardless of wherever it is. What's different is what happens to bodies, the disease profile, what can happen to a body, whether or not people can have, can follow a diet or take medicine or pay for it or whatever. So every curriculum will have a lot in common with every other. And my own opinion is, if you're worried about exporting students, well, I've got no patience with you. So, so just focus on the fact that medicine has got a common core, no matter where that is. You must teach science, you must teach clinical skills, and so on. How you do communication skills and all that stuff will be different in different places, but you must do that. So I don't think this is really a problem. And if you want to export them, well, why don't you at the end run a little "this is how it is in America" course?
I think there are a few more questions, but we almost 15 minutes over the time. So I would invite Dr. Sholay to summarize and end the session. And thanks, Prof. Janet. It was really wonderful session.
Thank you.
Dr. Sholay, you need to unmute yourself, please.
Thank you very much, Janet and Mr. Hassan, for this wonderful session, and all the participants for posing the wonderful questions. Again, I want to mention that, as Janet mentioned during her speech, to design a contextual curriculum.
Dr. Sholay, we could not hear you. Need to speak a bit loud.
We are not hearing.
I don't know what the problem is.
Much better now. You could repeat, yeah.
As we went through this wonderful session to design a conceptual curriculum, local healthcare needs, available resources, social, political, numerical, all important about inspiration for students, teachers. It was a very wonderful session, and I want to thank again Professor Grant for wonderful Mr. Patton for nice observations, and all the participants for posting their questions. We wish you all the best, and we are looking for your attendance to our next webinar and workshops. Thank you very much. China, do you have anything more to add?
Of Janet, any final words?
No, not at all. If people have further questions, I'm always happy to talk with people. Send me emails or whatever it is, and I'm always happy to help. And thank you, Sholay. It's lovely to see you.
Likewise, I enjoyed the wonderful presentation as usual. Mr. Hassan, any more things?
Yeah. Ms. Shifa, you have to announce something, right?
Yes, thank you so much. So IMI, or Imam Medics International, we're hosting a research seminar. I've linked the Zoom invite to the chat, so please feel free to join that event next. I know it would hopefully benefit many of you. It's a research guidance seminar.
Thank you very much, Safa.
Thank you.
Goodbye, everyone, and have a nice time.
Bye. Thank you.
Bye.
Bye. Thank you.
Thank you very much, everyone. Thank you very much, SIVU team.
Thank you.